How we doing, Pittsburgh? And anybody else watching, God knows where. It's Pittsburgh Sports Tonight. John Phillips. I'm pulling like triple duty today. Day job, North Allegheny Athletics appearance. Had to come back here at 7 o'clock. Thank God the school's right up the street. And we got an hour of sports talk today. I have heavy topics today. This show might break the internet. There's a good possibility of it. I'm not even kidding. We're going to get into Mike Tomlin in a few moments. I want to talk about my day today because, I have an hour to kill. And monster day today for me. Put some people to work locally. I work with a halfway house here in the city of Pittsburgh to put people to work. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge to just put anybody to work in this day and age. But today was quite a morning for me. Normally I get people working and then I'm on my way. Well, I had an individual who thought he could go on a construction site with some Nikes. So I had to deal with that today. And of course, a couple hours later, I'm planning a trip to Memphis, Tennessee next week. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and back Wednesday, Pittsburgh Sports Tonight. We'll see how things play out for next week. I don't know if I'll have 3 shows. I'm going to try, but I got to go to Memphis, Tennessee on Sunday. And excited. Haven't been down to Memphis in 16 years. And that was, I actually watched the only time I've ever actually been in Memphis was for Super Bowl 45. I had a business in Nashville and flew in a day early so I could watch the Super Bowl with a friend who I haven't spoken to in years. Watched it at his home in Memphis. And I kind of touched Memphis back in 2024 briefly. I drove to the airport. They were having a big expansion out there at the FedEx facility. But I really haven't been to Memphis in 16 years, and albeit this will be a short trip, 3 days, a couple days. We'll take in some things there in Memphis and Arkansas and Tunica maybe. Who knows? We're going to be hitting some spots to just for work related, but excited about going to Memphis. But today was a crazy day, and in the midst of a bunch of different things, every once in a while, when I have a moment, I like to check my X account just because I know there's a lot of news on there that I can get to that, try to keeps me updated with things. I can tell you right now, I follow this one particular account. His name is Scarps on X. His name is Ryan Scarpino. He is a Pittsburgh guy who worked for the Steelers for about 7 years as a media relations liaison. Good guy, real solid guy. I like Scarps. He was there during my time at the Fan, was always helpful, especially when it came to stuff in Latrobe or over on the South Side when I was working at the Fan. Quick to get a press credential together, happy to put interviews together, real helpful individual. And he's a great follow on X. And today he had a post that I thought was quite interesting. Good evening, Mean Green. Good to see you tonight, as well as Adam. Nice for you two to check in. Thank you so much, gentlemen. So I saw this post this afternoon. He posted it around 11:24. I can't remember what time it was exactly that I saw it. It was probably early afternoon, mid-afternoon. Might have been 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock even. And he said that I'm still surprised Mike T didn't do any media following him stepping away. He had the job as long as he wanted it, which are facts. There was no hot seat, also very true. He wasn't run out of town, a false narrative that certain people want to claim. His right to not say much, but thought there be money more than just a statement. And I started, like anything else, you start to kind of read some of the comments, and I saw a few of these comments, and one in particular caught my attention from this individual who has no real following, but has no avatar, has no background on his main page. And he says, who was the last NFL head coach who did a press conference interview after resigning, firing? That doesn't happen anymore. And immediately I'm like, well, Bill Cowher and Chuck Noll both did pressers after stepping down. which is true. They both did press conferences afterwards, right? Knoll retiring and Cowher resigning, right? We'll get into those topics here in a moment, tie this all together. So he shoots back, doesn't answer my question. Right? He's referring to 80s, 90s. Then you prove my point. I said it doesn't. He had a precedence, which is Tomlin, of those leaders before him who did the deed in having a farewell presser. And so I press this guy further on. He brings up Sean Payton when he stepped away from when he stepped away with the New Orleans Saints. I said, who cares what other coaches at other teams did? This is Pittsburgh, and these coaches represented the Steelers. I said, Tomlin can go pound it. And I said this afterwards as well when he decided he wasn't doing a press conference. He is arrogant. He's an egomaniac. He was handed a full cupboard, and he left the house essentially in shambles, which he has. Tomlin was handed a Super Bowl caliber roster. The team he inherited 2 seasons ago had won Super Bowl 40. The individual does not answer my question. I go back to him and say, hey, you're a fan. It shows. I don't know how things work in other organizations, right? And I said, you have no idea how things work in that organization, that being Pittsburgh. And then I asked him again, I said, did they resign on their own terms? And he couldn't answer that. He couldn't answer that. So, this topic has obviously been on the minds of a lot of people here since Mike Tomlin resigned. And look, here's the skinny. Okay, I'm not going to be breaking anything earth-shattering today, but I want to make it real clear to people who don't quite understand how the Steelers organization works, or in some other cases, just professional sports teams in terms of how they handle internal things. Okay, we'll start with Chuck Knoll, the Emperor Chaz Henry Knoll, right? 21 seasons at the helm. And, 4 Super Bowls, talk about whatever it is that you want. Greatest head coach in the franchise's history, bar none. You can debate who's second. Knoll is at the top and always will be. When 1991 season came to an end, when this 91 season came to an end, Dan Rooney, and I wasn't covering sports at that time in Pittsburgh. I was still in college, but I was starting to kind of work my way into some jobs, but was not covering anything full-time in Pittsburgh at that moment. Dan Rooney went to Chuck Knoll and basically told him, your time is done. Your time is done as head coach. It is time for you to move on. Chuck Knoll didn't retire on his own accord. He was told to retire. He was told that he was done. And the team planned accordingly. They had a press conference. They had a big announcement. Chuck was there. Said it was time to move on with my life's work. That was the famous quote from that interview, that press conference. I played that on the Fan on the night Chuck died, which I believe was 2014. It was during Pirates season. Dan Zangrilli was doing post game at the time. I was working and doing updates at the Fan. It might have been 2015 even. And I come walking into the studio. It was like the Pirate game had just ended. I can't remember who they were playing. But it was during the baseball season. I come walking in, and Dan's like, I got news for you. We're changing gears. I was like, what? Chuck Knoll just died. Okay. And I remember pulling sound from the CBS radio archives of him at that press conference. The fact of the matter is that Chuck Knoll was told to retire. He was told he was done. That's how Dan Rooney handled that scenario. They bring Bill Cowher in. A couple years later, I graduate. I start working in Pittsburgh. I end up on Arbor Boulevard. I'm working at AM 1250, and they were the Steelers' flagship at the time. I get a chance to interview Bill Cowher in his 3rd season. I covered his rookie season at Edinburgh when they came to Edinburgh and Sox Harrison Stadium, his first scrimmage with an opposing team was the Buffalo Bills in Edinburgh. I happened to cover that. It was big for me in 92. Here I am in 94 interviewing this guy. Let's go down the road 11 years later. Chuck Noll has Bill Cowher has finally won a Super Bowl, right? He's finally gotten over the hump, right? What was the big thing with Cowher? He couldn't win a conference championship game, and especially at home, right? He beat Indianapolis, obviously, in 95, but it took him another decade to win again, and that was on the road, right? They won the AFC Championship game in Denver that year. This was Ben's second season, and they go on to win the Super Bowl. He has another season in 06. The team does not make the playoffs, and Bill is in this position where he wants more money. And whatever the amount of money it was, Dan Rooney said no. Dan Rooney said no. And that's when Bill Cowher decided, I'm going to go work in television. And he resigned, right? He resigned from the position. There was somebody at the press conference afterwards that said, do you look, was either the comment was, do you look stressed, or something that agitated Bill, and he shot back, do I look like I'm stressed? Or do I can't remember the comment exactly, but that was at his post-game presser, or his resignation presser. Both these coaches held press conferences. Mean Green says, I think if there is a coach who surpasses Noll, would have to win more than 4 Super Bowls. Most likely. I would agree. Ralph Williams checking in said Noll never got the respect that he deserved. I don't know if that's true, Ralph. Thanks for checking in. I don't know if that's true. He won 4, right? I mean, look, Tom Landry won 2, and, the great Vince Lombardi, of course, won the first 2 Super Bowls, but he had so many NFL titles prior to that. I think Noll, Bill Walsh, he had 3. He had a great run, obviously, with San Francisco, 3 or 4. I can't remember if it was 3 or 4. I think it was actually 4. I think Noll probably maybe isn't looked at as top 5. I'll agree with you in that capacity, Ralph. I think he does get a good deal of respect because he was the first to win 4, and he was the only one to win 4 for a long time. But Chuck Noll had to step away because Dan Rooney told him to. Bill Cowher had to step away because he was not going to be given what he wanted, which was more money. Now we get to Mike Tomlin. And I have obsessed over this topic for probably 15 plus years now, right? I came to 93.7 The Fan in 2010. They go to this is his 4th year in the league. He leads them back to the Super Bowl, right? Tomlin is a deity in the making already, right? And very little was made about the roster he inherited, and that he was basically being handed keys to a Ferrari, right? When Bill Cowher took over the Steelers, he didn't get a Ferrari. He got a Subaru Outback that had 90 clicks on it and needed new wheels and some brakes and maybe a buff job or 2. He didn't have a completely empty roster, but it was not. It was well past the Super Bowl era of the 70s. And, again, I know that, Chuck did whatever he in 84 and especially in 89, he did incredible work to just get them back to the playoffs in 2 occasions. There were some bad football teams in the 80s that the Steelers had. And I saw quite a few of them up close and personal. I went to quite a few games in the 1980s with my mother, who knew somebody that had season tickets but just didn't want to go anymore. And we would go to quite a few games. And I'm telling you, even though they were sold out, there was plenty of tickets to be had back then. They were not good. This was not a good team. And so, when Bill took over, there was some sort of a roster there, probably similar to where Mike McCarthy is right now. Maybe he's got a little bit more, maybe he doesn't. Maybe it's a similar scenario. When Mike Tomlin was hired, and again, you have to go back to 2006, right? The end of the 06 season, we're talking 2007 here, in January of 07. By all accounts, Russ Grimm had the job. By all accounts, Russ Grimm, who was on the staff at the time, okay, was the offensive line coach, had that job. It was his. And the insiders here in town were literally writing about it as if it was to come to pass. And then out of nowhere, this first-year defensive coordinator shows up from Minnesota via 4 years as a defensive backs coach in Tampa Bay. And all of a sudden, like a lightning bolt, we've got a young new head coach. It was a stunner. It was an absolute stunner in Pittsburgh. Nobody could figure out how and what. He blew them away in the interview. Okay, Mike Tomlin's the head coach. Boom. AFC, championship game, where they went to the playoffs that first year, I think it was, and they didn't go anywhere. And then, of course, they go to the Super Bowl in the second season and win Super Bowl 43. 2 years later, 45, they lose to the Green Bay Packers. After that season occurred, it was within those next 5 years, no playoff wins, right? No playoff wins. You had the disaster in 2011, in the playoffs in 2011, right? When they went to Denver and they lost to Tim Tebow. Remember that on the first play of overtime? That was not a good Denver Broncos team, but because they won the AFC West, the Steelers had 11 wins and were a wild card because Baltimore had won the division. The Steelers had to go on the road. They had to play Tebow, and they ended up losing that game. That was the first kink in the armor. That was the first sign. 12-13, right? No playoff wins, 14. Finally, they get a playoff win in 15. And then the 16 season unfolds, right? They get 2 playoff wins, the second of which was a 6 field goal game by Chris Boswell. It was his rookie year. And then they go to New England and they get blown out in the playoffs. And that's when the wheels started to really fall off. And that's when you really started to get a good gauge of who Mike Tomlin was. Because at that point in time, he was 10 years in as the head coach. And he didn't have the roster he had been granted when he was given the job. He's now 6 years later. It's his team at that point in time. It was his team. And we started to really see some real issues. Clock management, timeout usage, when and when not to use them. Challenges. Challenges became a challenge for Tomlin. Still the only head coach in the challenge era to go 2 seasons back-to-back where he didn't win a single challenge with a minimum of 3 challenges in each season. No coach has ever done that other than Mike Tomlin. And, of course, more one-and-dones. More one-and-dones, with the last 5 being just a sad string of blowouts and really having no chance. They did have a home playoff game this year, and they were close. They were 10-6 heading into the fourth quarter, but the offense never generated any kind of momentum against that really stout Texans defense. And, of course, the next day, Tomlin resigns. Why does he resign? Well, he said family. And I could sit here and talk about all the innuendos and all of what people have been saying over the last few months. I know there was a big hubbub in maybe mid-October, late October. One of the local guys who is really popular on X, has big following on Instagram, said something he alluded to some things in a county up north and Tomlin. And the dude disappeared off of social media for a while. And then, of course, the season unfolds the way it does, and then Tomlin disappears, and then people start asking questions again. Here's what I'll tell you about personal news, personal matters when it comes to players and especially coaches. A lot of people like to say things on social media. Doesn't make it always true. Are rumors true? I don't know. When it comes to personal matters of a player or a coach, I have always taken the line that it's none of my business. Unless that individual makes it public matter to somebody like myself and to a lot of people who cover the team, it's nothing that we're going to discuss publicly or go and dig into. It's not our job. Our job is X's and O's. Our job is opinion related to the job that the person is dealing with. Okay. I know for a fact that somebody of high profile nature in the Pirates organization lost their job because they had an affair with someone. I know for a fact that somebody who worked in the front office at the Pittsburgh Steelers had an affair with a woman while he was married, lost his job. That was never discussed publicly. It was never discussed publicly. These rumors that Mike Tomlin had said about him were also said about his predecessor. But it was never discussed publicly because it's a personal matter. We live in this era of TMZ and gotcha, and you got to get it now, and sensationalism, and all of these other things. But I think it has always been a fair stance to take when it comes to rumors and innuendos to be left in that manner. To be left in that manner. Whatever somebody is outside of their job, I don't particularly care. It may get discussed amongst members of the media, personally, internally, as a, hey, did you hear this? Did you hear that? I heard this. I heard that. But it's never going to make the light of day. Case in point, Ben Roethlisberger. I brought this up last week when the whole Joey Porter thing went down. Ben Roethlisberger in 2005, after he won the Super Bowl, was out and about on his motorbike, driving around Pittsburgh with no helmet. Got into an accident. Wasn't his fault. Some woman hit him. Well, he had a whole bunch of lacerations on his head. He had to go to the hospital. It was not pretty. He didn't die, but he was driving around on a motorbike, speeding around, and he got into an accident. Wasn't his fault, but he had serious injuries enough that, they had to stitch him up, and the Rooneys had to come in and say to Ben, stop it. You can't behave in this manner. Quarterback says, okay. And if you go on X and can find John Steigerwald, you will see that he tweeted about this recently. Shortly after that happened, I don't know what the time frame was. I think it was a month or two or a few months after this had happened. Ben Roethlisberger gets on his motorbike, his speed bike, and gets caught driving and speeding again. Gets caught speeding again. Channel 2 had a camera crew out there, caught him in the act. Roethlisberger flips the cameraman off. They take the tape back to Channel 2, and the news director at the time said this tape will never see the light of day. That is a true story. That is a true story. And if you don't believe me, go find John Steigerwald's X page or go find his YouTube account. He just talked about it last week when all of that went down. These things happen. And in a lot of cases, they don't see the light of day. And that's just, how it is. And I'm okay with all of that. Again, rumors and innuendos can stay in that realm. I want to talk about what's going on between the lines. I want to talk about what's going on with a head coach. And that's where it should be. Okay. I told you Tony Bruno was going to come on the show I can't even believe that he's agreed to do this. I'm very excited to bring him on. Tony Bruno has been working in radio for, I don't know, probably 40 plus years. Of course, came to national spotlight. Is from Philadelphia, and I know people we have this love-hate relationship with Philadelphia, but I love Philadelphia. I love going out there. I love working out in that area. I do a lot of business out that way, and Tony Bruno is going to be joining us here on the show. I want to bring him on. He's in our backstage right now. He does afternoons on Odyssey Station in Philly. Tony Bruno, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me, sir. It's a real pleasure to speak with you.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate it. You know what? Pittsburgh, people don't realize that Pittsburgh and Philadelphia may as well be worlds apart. You know, we always talk about the rivalry and with the Penguins and the Flyers, and baseball with the Phillies and the Pirates. You know, there's a lot of great, obviously the Steelers and the Eagles who play every year in preseason. So, Philly and Pittsburgh may be far apart, but the fan bases are very similar. You know, they travel well. People are into the teams. They live and die with every move. And so, that's what's great about sports. You know, it either brings cities together or it tears them apart. And now the Steelers, you guys, for the first time in how long? I'm dealing with getting rid of a coach that was there forever and now trying to put the pieces back together again, and the quarterback situation and all the other stuff that's going on. So it always leads to great conversation on talk radio from fans. And the great thing about radio now is that you don't have to be on the radio. I started my first podcast when I was still on the air. And so now people are realizing that the digital realm, which you're in, John, is the way to go. Not because radio is dead. Radio is never going to die, right, but because you can now have a show and talk about anything you want and hopefully get people to listen and watch, and then you monetize that. So that's what makes this business great, is that it's no longer about, ripping the wire and seeing what's going on in the world. When I started at ESPN, and that wasn't my start of my career. I started in Philly at an AM station working overnights for 7 years before I saw the light of day back in the 70s, when you had to move your way up the food chain. And, thank God that you don't have to do that anymore. You hear guys on the air who are producers, women who were producers or phone screeners who move up the food chain. And I like seeing that, because they're the next generation of people who will do this. But having the internet really exploded the way we communicate now. So if you don't embrace the digital realm, then you're basically lost in the past, like a lot of people, in my age group. I'm 73. I've been doing radio for 50 plus years. So I knew back then, I didn't know the internet was going to, when I was at ESPN, it started in 92, when we started the ESPN radio network, and they called me, and I was doing WIP mornings in Philly, which was the top rated morning show in the city.
Yes.
They asked me to come up and do weekends, and I did that. And so that was really my first major taste of national radio, and it was great for my career. I mean, I loved what ESPN did, and I'm happy to be one of the guys who helped start that. And then 10 years later, Fox Sports Radio called me in Los Angeles and wanted me to be the first guy on the air at their new network. So, the respect that I've received because I've worked so hard my entire life, I'm happy about my career. And that's when I could put my head on the bed at night on the pillow, I know that I try my best and I try to be the same guy I've always been. People change, but I don't think I've ever changed. People always ask me, and I'm sure they ask you too this, John, how do you get to be like Tony Bruno or John Phillips? And I say, you don't. You get to be yourself. You can't be another. Yeah, you can't be Tony Bruno. I mean, you can, a lot of the stuff that I say, a lot of my catchphrases, I got from other people. And so I incorporate that into my jargon. But the bottom line is you can only be yourself. And that's what people judge you on, whether or not they like you or dislike you. I try not to be a guy who yells at people. I get outraged every once in a while. But for the most part, we're talking about sports. I'm not just talking about sports now. I'm doing a mainstream show where we talk politics, sports, news, whatever's happening. So I think the sports world now is exploding. Everybody has a podcast, and if you don't, why don't you? I mean, do you know anybody who doesn't have a podcast?
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, no, it's very true. It's very true. I was told to do this 13 years ago by Andrew Filipponi, who does afternoons here at the Fan when I was working at CBS at the time, and I was like, maybe. Now, hindsight being 2020, but it's never late to never. I'm happy to be doing this right now, and I've seen a good portion of your career because I was coming up behind you. I worked worked in Pittsburgh at the ESPN affiliate, used to listen to your show. I moved to Las Vegas to do syndicated radio. I got to work with Pete Rose when we were syndicating his show. So that was early on in the syndicated radio business. And have just I've always admired your work, and especially your patriotic view on the country. And, you're not afraid to be opinionated about topics. And I want to talk to you about a few things specifically, because I know your show is on, what is it, PHT? You're on 1210 PHT, afternoons 3 to 6. That's an Odyssey station. By the way, if you get your Odyssey app out there, you can listen to Tony in the afternoons. I want to let's talk about this thing in Rhode Island, which obviously it happened at a hockey rink in this thing. I'm sure you've been discussing this subject matter. Have we lost our minds in this country? Do we need to bring back insane asylums? Where are we going in this day and age? It's completely. We've lost our marbles. I mean, I'm 56 right now. I've lived through the end of the Cold War, right? I remember going under hey, put yourself under the desk for the air raid, nuclear,
exactly.
right? I've lived through quite a few moments in time, right? The assassination attempt on Reagan, the Clinton impeachment, 9/11. I was in a television newsroom here in Pittsburgh. I worked at NBC here in Pittsburgh. I was in their newsroom during that entire fiasco, that event. I've seen and I was working for CBS Radio when Trump made his announcement in 2015. I want to get your thoughts on the world today, and especially with that incident that happened in Rhode Island. Very tragic, and I just kind of wanted to see where you thought on that.
Yeah, and again, I have no problem with people wanting to identify as a man or a woman. Do that. The fact that people think that the government is stopping people from being trans or trans-identified is ridiculous. The problem is the media doesn't want to identify a trans person when there's a murder involving a trans person. You saw how the media referred to him as a person who identified as a man and a woman. What's wrong with saying who the suspect is? The guy obviously is not a woman. He was all jacked up, and I hear he's a Trump supporter. I don't care whether he's a supporter of Trump, Biden, or whomever. The bottom line, this guy was mentally deranged. Imagine carrying a loaded gun into a hockey rink where high school kids were playing, and then all of a sudden, you've seen the video, shots ringing out. You have to be beyond mentally ill to even think of doing such a thing. And then killing your ex-wife and your son and injuring innocent people who were there just to watch their kids play hockey. And so, to me, I don't think there's an explanation. I think the fact that the media is corrupt, and it is, and it pains me to say this because I started out as a news guy. So I don't want to hate the media, but the media makes it hard to support them because the media now they don't want to be reporters anymore. They want to be analysts. They want to be pundits. And there's a difference. When I started doing news, I wasn't allowed to give opinions after a story. I did the news, I gave the facts, and then later when I progressed and became more cognizant, interviewing 5 presidents and interviewing all the sports people that I did, I learned how to get the facts first and then make an opinion afterwards. At ESPN, we got the facts first, we got the scores, and then we would talk to interviews, but we never really, got into heated debates about sports back in the 90s. Because back then the world was different. We didn't even have internet. We didn't have phone calls. Sports radio back then, we were doing 7 hours on Saturday and Sunday nights. Me, Chuck Wilson from Providence, Rhode Island.
I remember
Keith Olbermann was there. We had a lot of great talent there, and that was just a weekend show. So that really helped me advance and understand that when there's a tragedy, you talk about the tragedy and you try to deal with it respectfully. But the fact that the media and all of these political leaders who are afraid to explain what happened, that's the problem. People are afraid because they have narratives. The narrative is, we can't announce that it's a trans person who just, committed a mass murder. Why not? We want this to know who the suspects are. We want to know what his history was. Bottom line is we care about the victims. We care too much we don't care about the victims. We care about the moron who commits these crimes. And all of these people have one thing in common. Not that they're trans, but that they're absolutely insane and should not be walking the streets of this country or being released from any kind of incarceration. To do that is beyond human comprehension to me in this day and age. With all of the information, all of the security, all of the things all you had to do was look at this guy and realize there was something wrong with him.
Yeah, most definitely. The great Tony Bruno joining us. You can catch him on the Odyssey app weekdays 3 to 6 p.m. on 1210 WPHT. Tony, 50 years in the radio business. Talk to me about your view on sports today. What has changed that you like about sports? Maybe something that you don't like. What you see today. Load management is one of my favorites that I don't like.
Oh
in the
yeah.
NBA.
Yeah. That's that's what it is. And the other thing that's changed, which I think is good, I think, like in Philly, there's all kinds of Eagles podcasts and Phillies podcasts and Sixers and Flyers. And that's what you got a lot of young people who may not have even had a radio career, but they'll pick up on a niche and do good jobs. These people are good. They're good writers. They're smart. And that's how they build careers. You don't have to have a radio career to have a successful podcast. In fact, many of the successful podcasters weren't radio or TV people.
Right.
They were people who found a niche and then focused on that. So I know in Pittsburgh, there's a lot of Pittsburgh Steelers podcast dedicated to 24/7. Everybody knows what's going on inside this organization and that organization. And a lot of it's speculation. But there are some who actually still go out and cover stories and actually go to the locker rooms and go to the news conferences. But now, we live in a world where everything's digital. So you don't have to worry about, the box score anymore. You don't have to worry about who won or who lost. You get that information instantly. So seeing who was the first on reporting the final of a hockey game between the Flyers and the Penguins, you're not breaking news. Everybody knows it. When I'm watching sports and I'm on Twitter, I see, and everybody posts the same thing. Oh, so-and-so just scored. No kidding. We're watching the game. You don't need to tell me who just scored because we have 52,000 channels to watch sports. But that's the bottom line. Listen, I'm all for it. Anybody who can find a way to do a podcast or make money or get a following, that's what you do. Yeah. I mean, I didn't start that. I started that way because I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a reporter. I wanted to go out and cover stories. I've been to 4 Olympic Games. I've been to 42 Super Bowls. So traveling the world and covering sports and being paid to do it, that's something that's a luxury, and I'm grateful for the ability to do that, but I had to work hard to get to that stage. So it's not just, having a pretty voice on the radio and average intelligence. That helps, but you still have to go out and do the work, and you have to produce a body of work so people will say, hey, I like that guy, I want to hire him, or nah, I don't want that, he's too toxic.
How much longer do you think you'll work at this, Tony? Scott Farrell is a friend of mine, said he's done at 65. He just turned 60. He had a heart attack a few years ago. He said at 65, I'm done. You're in your 70s now. How much longer do you think you'll continue it until you no longer enjoy it, or are you going to be like some of these others that they'll find you in front of the microphone path, completely keeled over, and that's it?
Well, I was pretty much semi-retired when I moved to Florida because I grew up in Philly. I worked in Philly. I worked in Birmingham, Alabama, early in my career for 2 years back in the 70s when Bear Bryant and Ralph Shug Jordan were the coaches down there. So I learned a lot down there. I know Scotty Farrell really, really well. He's a great friend. Another guy from the area who knows all sports, and he's a great, great friend. And I talk to him a lot. I was on a show many times, but back to the Pittsburgh. I mean, Beano Cook was a great friend. The Pope of I named him the Pope of college football back when I used to have Beano on every Saturday night. John Clayton, another Pittsburgh guy, legendary guy, great human being. Went to work in Seattle. But, so I've worked with some of the greatest people that you could ever imagine. And that's one of the things I'm most proud of. I didn't pick and choose who I was going to work with, but I learned from people who were so much better, had more knowledge than I did. So that's what I tried to do. I tried to look at people who were accomplished, and I would respect them and learn from them. And I don't know whether young people now are ready to learn or they just think they know it all. Whatever it is, if you think you know it all and you get a following, just be honest with people. There's a lot of shtick out there. I don't have a shtick. I just speak from my heart, and I've always done that. And so that's the thing. If you're true to yourself and you don't have an act when you go on radio or TV, then people will respect you. Listen, I have no problem with people having acts. And there's some of the greats of all time, Morton Downey Jr., remember? Right. All these guys who would do the shock TV. Jerry Springer, who was a mayor of Cincinnati. He had one of the most successful crazy shows on television ever. So to me, it's about pick something you like, follow it. I had no reason to get into radio. My dad died when I was 10, an immigrant mom from Italy who spoke very little English. But I listened to the radio at night. I became fascinated when I would go down in my basement and turn on the AM radio, and I'd get all these stations from around like Whoa and Indianapolis.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's great.
No, that's how I was as a kid.
Yeah.
I had a little radio, and I could listen to Marty Glickman in New York. I could listen to WLW in Cincinnati, right? I could listen to KMOX in St. Louis and Joe Buck, but it's so money. It's so weird that you say that because I think that people like us, and I consider myself to be a radio guy because that's where I spent most of my career. I spent most of my career in radio. I think that's not an uncommon trait, to be quite honest with you. I'm glad that you said that. The great Tony Bruno joining us. Just a couple more minutes, sir, of your time. I am very grateful that you give us a few minutes here.
No problem.
About a week and a half ago, the Olympics are going on right now. I know the USA won in overtime today. Exciting game. As the Olympics were starting, some of the American athletes were being a little outspoken and talking on topics that were politically, sensitive, if you will, or were just like politically in terms of the questions. And Boomer Esiason, who of course does mornings on CBS at 66 WFAN, said that maybe they should just be quiet. I took the other stance. Since 1968, and maybe even prior to that, 1960, with Cassius Clay, who later came out to speak out against the Vietnam War, professional athletes and politics have been a part of our fabric for probably 60, 70 years here. Yep. I didn't necessarily agree with that opinion. I wanted to see how you feel about athletes on a global stage or even on a national stage. Steve Kerr is very opinionated and will speak about politics, if you will. How do you feel about athletes and politics? Is that a no-go zone, or is it open? Is it open game for everybody?
Well, it's open game for everybody. Now, I think talking about the Olympics, a lot of these young athletes are up there. And when I heard, the skater who lost last night, the woman from Plano, Texas, she lost. She wound up finishing 13th. She was a medalist. I'm not happy that she tripped and fell. I don't root against any athletes. But the problem is we have media people who go to the Olympics. They get a credential, and their purpose is to ask questions about what they think about the president of the United States and the United States as a country and how we treat our people. You never hear any of the athletes being asked of foreign countries, what do you think about what's going on in China? They don't ask the athletes that. But I think all the cuts that you saw from these athletes, American athletes, who were asked political questions, their answers were inane for the most part because they have no idea what they're talking about. They just listen to what their friends tell them. And that's what a lot of young people do today. And I'm not saying because I'm an old guy and I'm yelling at you, get off my lawn. I'm just saying is you can't ask people who really have no idea how government works, how the Constitution works, how the woman who lost, who was a member of the gay community, no one asked her, what part of you being gay have you been stopped from mentioning? What gay person has been stopped or not allowed to be openly gay or profess their gayness? It's a fallacy.
Doesn't exist. Yeah, it doesn't exist. You're right. No doubt. And the woman skater you were referring to was Amber Glenn. I had forgotten her name.
Amber Glenn, yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
Amber Glenn. Tony Bruno, thank you so much. I could keep you on here forever, but I'm sure that there'd be a cease and desist order sent immediately. I can't thank you
enough. This is great. I'm feeling better. I've been going through health issues for the last 6 months, but I'm taking medication, so I have good days and bad days, but I'm just happy to be alive. And as far as working till I die, I don't know. I just do it. People call me and say, hey, you want to do this? And then I can't say no. So I still like it because, it's talking. It's talking. But I try to get information. I don't just go onto a show and just wing it. You can't wing facts. If people know, especially in sports and especially in politics, if you don't know what you're talking about, people get that right away. So you can't fake this stuff. You got to prepare if you're doing any kind of organized show.
I totally concur. Next time I'm in town, I'm buying at Ishka Bibbles. That's on me.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful.
Tony Bruno,
Thank you,
my pleasure, absolutely. And tell Miss Robin, thank you for getting this scheduled for me. I'm very grateful, Tony. Thank you.
No problem. Thank
All
you.
right,
Appreciate it.
yeah, absolutely. The great Tony Bruno, 50 plus years in the radio business. How does it? That is I'm telling you right now, as somebody who, the radio business it's like anything in media, it'll chew you up and spit you out. And radio, of the three mediums that I grew up on, and maybe Tony will attest to this, it was always print. Print was always the gold standard, television, and then radio was always at the bottom. If you worked in radio, in the media, you were kind of looked at and frowned upon. And as somebody who worked for Bruce Kyden, right, and then I've had my battles over the decades with Bob Smizek, who's long since retired, and Bob didn't write anything nice about me in my career when I was doing evenings over on AM 1250 when it was the sports station in town. The writers in town back then in the 80s and 90s, they commanded the respect, right? They had a lot of the radio jobs. They had a lot of the talk show positions the radio talent did, right? Bruce Kyden was on 1250 AM. Myron Cope, who, of course, famous for working for the Steelers for many decades, he started out as a writer, right? He wrote for Sports Illustrated and wrote for newspapers, and then eventually turned his career to radio and, of course, TV. But a lot of the writers in town all had positions in radio for decades and decades. It's still the case. Is still very much the case. Tony Bruno, can't thank him enough. Amazing career and just great insight. And I'm so thrilled I was able to pull this off. I wasn't sure if I was going to get him or not. And today it just kind of happened in a lightning bolt. Robin got back to me and she said, he'll do it today. I said, okay. Tony Bruno, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, we're trying to deliver guests of, quality here. We get a lot of different guests. We've had some guests so far. We're going to have more guests as the show kind of progresses along. My schedule in my day job is getting pretty bonkers right now. And my concern is my commitment to 3 days a week right now. And I got to sit down and talk with Maddie B at It's a Wrap Sports. Of course, if you didn't know this already, and I should tell you, we are part of the It's a Wrap Sports Network. Maddie B's network of shows can be found at It's a Wrap Sports on Facebook, X, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. All kinds of different shows. Philadelphia-centric, I should say. Philadelphia-centric shows, as I should say. Let me take that off of there. And tonight at 8 o'clock, we have the Pittsburgh Sports Desk. That's coming up. I believe Ed's going to be hosting that. Bill Akins will not be hosting the show tonight, but there'll be a group of 2 or 3 people there on that one. And then the final word with Maddie B. Maddie B, of course, is the architect behind It's a Wrap Sports, 5 nights a week at 9 o'clock, Sunday through Thursday. You can check his show out. One of my other personal favorites, mostly because they put me on the show a few weeks ago, is the Philly AM Sports Show, exclusively on Sundays at 9 o'clock with Al Zafiri and Mike Loro. Mike does a Penn State football show during the season as well. But It's a Wrap Sports. Make sure that we get on the air every single night. And I'm excited that I was able to figure out my internet issues. Like, we've got the streaming all figured out. We got nice speed. But my schedule is going to pick up in a hurry for work, which concerns me about still being able to do an hour a night, 3 nights a week. So we're going to take a little bit of a peek at that tomorrow. And I'm hoping to have shows for you next week. I don't know if I'm going to have 3, but I'm going to try. I am going to be on the road in Memphis, Tennessee. I'll be in Arkansas and Mississippi. And it's just going to really depend. And if I end up in Utah come April, you may not hear from me for a while. That's my concern. My job comes first, like anything else. Tony's been, like he said, he was semi-retired for a while. Opportunity for him to come back into talk radio in Philadelphia was a natural, I'm sure, for him. I don't see myself ever getting offered any radio positions here in Pittsburgh ever again, and that's okay. Even though I could step into a radio booth and talk for 4 hours and entertain and do a great job. This has been a comfort for me. I've enjoyed this immensely. It's almost therapeutic in some areas because I just enjoy conversation and I like telling stories and I like providing my opinion, of which we were talking about the Mike Tomlin story. And one of the posters, I believe it was Mean Green, said, do you think the reason why Tomlin didn't have a press conference after stepping away, did it have more to do with ego or was it something else? Well, I think it was mostly ego. And I also think it had something to do with something else. But it was mostly ego. Tomlin hated the media, despised the media. I don't think he was a big fan of the fans at the end because I think they were demanding something that, look, in this city, with the history and the lineage, 9 seasons without a playoff win is completely unacceptable. In the Super Bowl era, no head coach that has won a Super Bowl went more than 6 seasons without a playoff win before they lost their job. And that was Tom Landry, by the way. Tomlin went 9. And he would have been retained by Art II had he not stepped down. Wrap your head around that for just a moment, folks. Wrap your head around that for just a minute. And think about that. Art Rooney was willing to give it another go and probably extend Tomlin further after 9 seasons without a playoff win. How does that even happen? Where has that ever happened before? It has not. Which is why I say that Art II inherited the family business and is an attorney by trade and he's not his dad. I don't think Art II, I think Art wants to win. He would like to win, but I don't know if he knows how to win as a team president of an NFL franchise, even though he's been in charge for over 20 years. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think I am, because we have this blueprint of the last 9 seasons that tell us, we'll just extend him some more. Maybe they'll win a playoff game. We're getting a little worried, but he's never had a losing season. Never had a losing season. And this isn't about race. For all the people that want to say it's about race. Oh, you're a racist, John. Oh, you don't like him because he's black. Oh, you don't like him because he's successful. Not the case. Winning in January matters, and especially in the National Football League and specifically with this franchise. This is not Jacksonville. This is not Cleveland. It's not Cincinnati. It's not Tennessee. It's not Arizona. It's Pittsburgh. When you talk about the elite franchises in the NFL, there are 4 that I consider to be elite. There's New England, right? There's Pittsburgh. There's Dallas. There's Green Bay. I'll throw San Francisco in there because they got 5. Those are your 5 elite franchises, right? Those are the 5. That is the gold standard in the NFL. They're at the top of the top. They're the ones everybody else wants to be like. We win playoff games here. Mike Tomlin was not doing that. He called it quits. And thankfully so, because I can't even imagine going through another offseason with Mike Tomlin as head coach. I don't care if this team goes 6-11 next year, 5-12. I will welcome that, because then they will be within the top 10 of picking in the next draft, maybe even in the top 5, right? 4 wins. I'd welcome a 4-win season. I wouldn't have any problem with it whatsoever, because that's where you get an opportunity to change the course of your franchise with a quarterback. And that's what this team's going to need. They're going to have Aaron Rodgers next year, folks. You can pretty much wrap that up. I know there was a report, or at least I should say, I saw online somebody tossing around the idea that CJ Stroud could be on the trading block in Houston, which to me is nuts. But I did see that today. Look, if that were the case, I'd be interested immediately. You could take our 21st pick, and here's a second rounder, and here's a 4th rounder. I'll give you 4 or 5 picks for him. You've got 12 this year. and you get a contract worked out with that young man. I like CJ Stroud. I think he's a talented young quarterback. He's won 3 playoff games in 3 years in the NFL, and he won his first road playoff game this year. The kid's got moxie. He's got talent. He's got ability. He's got years ahead of him. If that's even remotely true, and I'm the Steelers, I'm making a phone call to Houston to try to work something out. And then you get with the agent, and then you work out an extension, right? You give him an additional 3 years. You take his 4th year as a rookie, you give him more money, and then however the NFL works that stuff out. I know there would be he's on his rookie deal. You work something out. If that were the case, I don't know if it's true or not, but I did see it from somebody. Okay, I want to thank everybody for being a part of the show this evening. I hope the 40 or so of you that have been flipping in and out through the last hour, checking this out. I appreciate you coming on the stream this evening. I can't thank Tony Bruno enough. Just an absolute legend, solid guy. Can't say enough about him and giving me 20 plus minutes and a variety of topics. I like to mix it up, especially with somebody of that nature. He's not afraid to talk about things that aren't sports related, but I tried to, mix it in there a little bit regarding sports. Super guy, and amazing that Tony was able to give us a few minutes of his time. Okay. I hope to be on the air Monday next week. I will be traveling, and my schedule is going to get nuts here, but I'm going to do my best to continue to keep doing this because I just enjoy it. I really do. When you can have a guest like that and you mix it in with, comments from guys like Mean Green, Adam, Ralphie, Williams checking in, it helps. And an hour passes like nothing. It's, I don't even blink at doing an hour. It's just really enjoyable. All right. For the entire cast and crew, including my cat, Sherman, who's been trying to jump up here a few times this evening. I'm John Phillips. Be safe out there, folks. You be careful. It's a crazy world out there, and be kind to people. That's the other message I would like to say. Be kind to people. It pays itself off in spades. Okay, I'm John Phillips. This has been Pittsburgh Sports Tonight on the It's a Wrap Sports Network. We'll talk to you hopefully on Monday, and stay tuned to our Facebook page for updates and our X page on next week's programming. For the entire group here this evening, which is basically me, I'm saying good night to you folks. This has been Pittsburgh Sports Tonight on the It's a Wrap Sports Network.